government believe that sex and sexual expressions have for far too long have been seen as taboos, creating an unhealthy relationship between people and their sexuality and their sexual identity. As open government, with this model, we see a future where we are able to, 1, liberalize sexuality, and 2, dismantle gender stereotypes. And I'll be proving to you how we're able to do this throughout my substances. And before I move on, our model is quite simple. We will be removing all restrictions, all restrictions for sexual expressions, whether it be for art or just plain public displays of sexuality. We are going to remove all restrictions and have a free society. So today I'll be talking about 2 things. 1, how public disclosure is critical in this motion, and 2nd, why offensiveness is an illegitimate criteria to restrict this kind of sexual expression. So first, about public disclosure, how it's very important, right? So we say that in the status quo there is a huge disparity between men and women, right? So when a man takes off his shirt and goes running, he's seen as hot. He's seen as a sex symbol. He's seen as a star player. Whereas if a woman go so far as to walk the street without a bra, they're seen as obscene. If they're showing too much skin, they're seen as obscene, and they're called sluts on the internet. And we say that this kind of difference we see between men and women is absolutely unacceptable, right? We say on a principle level that everyone has the right to express their body because they have ownership and they should have autonomy over their body, and they should be able to use it however they like. And we say and on OG we openly support feminist movements such as allowing breastfeeding on the train and all that. We say that kind of expressing your sexuality and nudity in a public space, we support all of that. Secondly, we say that the general metric we use when we talk about sexual expressions, those kind of expressions are bound to Christian values and Western values in the status quo, right? This means that in public, when people see LGBTQIA plus couples interacting in a public area, they're criticized, right? And we say that that kind of difference between how someone would point to a heterosexual couple versus a LGBTQ couple, the difference there is an unjustifiable violation of their right of their personal expression, right? And we say that, and we support this kind of open expression for a more diverse and more liberal more liberal definitions of sexuality, right? We also think that having these kind of open expressions will help teens that are still struggling and still don't understand much about their sexual identity. It'll help these teens be able to come out more and be more confident in their own skin and in their own identity. And we say that this can only be created from them visually seeing these alternate forms of sexuality. Third, it is important that this motion will be in a public sphere, right? Because we say that the uniqueness of having this in a public area is that it generates discourse, right? As I said in my introduction, we say that it is unhealthy and toxic that these sexual expressions are considered taboos. And because people have been negligent to really talk about sex, even though it's part of who we are, we don't even have that diverse of a vocabulary to be able to even talk about sex and sexual terms, right? So we say that that because of this of the resulting poor amount of vocabulary that we have, it is better for people to be able to visually see even without words and witness what kind of sexuality is out there and anything about sex, right? We say that that kind of like creating discourse and being able to be aware and be able to understand that there are all types of sexualities that can only be done in a public sphere. Now, we do concede to the fact that there are going to be like hyper-conservative people, but we see that these people are the minority. Most people, like especially the Gen Zs, the majority of our people are moderate or very liberal. We don't think that they will go so far as to like speak ill of these kind of expressions. We say that rather it'll be part of like they will able to use that as an experience to like broaden their knowledge on sexuality and all that. Fourth, we say that with public disclosure, we're actually able to protect children, right? Because we say that on a daily basis, like teens and kids are able to access like unhealthy forms of sexual expression on the internet, right? Without parental consent, they can easily go in incognito mode on Google and go on Pornhub and see like all these kinds of like extreme expressions of sex and all that, right? And we say that like comparatively speaking, we say that it is better for these teenagers and kids to be able to interact with these sexual expressions on a like a public level, right? Because if it's in a public level, there'll be more open criticism if the sexual expression is simply unacceptable and toxic. We say that we're able to like mitigate the harms of these children nowadays having access to distorted pornography and that kind of unhealthy and creating that unhealthy relationship with sex. Second, I'll be talking about how the opposition bench is probably going to talk about how this is offensive, right? But I'm going to be talking about why this is an illegitimate criteria to restrict expression. First, because the sense of offensiveness is subjective, right? We think that anything can be offensive. Like like if you're Christian, being Muslim will be offensive. If you're for capitalism, communism is offensive. If you're pro-Trump, then someone that supports Biden is offensive. We say that everyone has the duty to see these countering views, and we believe in the strength of humans to be able to face opposite identities. We say that is not a legitimate reason to restrict these kinds of expressions. And moreover, we say that people are able to get used to this kind of expression in the long term. It's a transitional aspect for people to maybe like be critical of this view. We see this through like the female movement. We saw and how women's fashion changed from being very like having long dresses to maybe showing more skin. And in order to openly accept all forms of sexualities, create healthy relationships with sex and sexuality, we are very proud to propose. I'm so sorry.
So I would like to answer two questions in my speech. Firstly, how should we deal with radicality and extremity in public sphere? Secondly, how do people alternatively construct sexual identity and sexuality that are counterfactual? So moving on to the first question, how should we deal with radicality and extremity in a public sphere? So the leader of opposition explained that there is a danger of sexual harassment and sexual assault. We believe unconsensual sexual contact is a different debate. It's a crime we're more than happy to capture and arrest them. Those kind of people have already done it, even right now. So the difference is it's very important to educate those people and potential and a young generation through healthy, open, and transparent public discourse. Moreover, if their leader of opposition is talking about emotional damage or mental shock, we believe offense is not a legitimate criterion to restrict any kind of expression because it is subjective. When you confront different gender identity or ethnic identity or ideological identity or religious identity, maybe you feel a little bit offended, but that's not the reason for the state to restrict the expression, because the member of a plural society has a duty to confront a countervailing view. It's not like your identity is fundamentally shaken up to the core just because you confront alternative identity. And unlike physical damage, the emotional shock is not publicly observable, it's not externally verifiable. Moving on, second level of counter analysis, people do not have like incentive to show sexuality rampantly for no better reasons. The individuals belong to community, school, or workplace. They are afraid of being expelled from the community, so they don't do it rapidly. When they have clear incentive or political objective that they want to deliver to, people engage with some form of radical expression like a feminism protest. And it's a great thing, because, otherwise, minorities' rights and voice and LGBT's rights have been historically marginalized and ignored and unreasonably oppressed. So let's make a comparison. Defending the rights of those vulnerable people is far more important than the fear of radical. Because that's a rare case. Why? Because government legislatures bears a duty to protest weaker side and err on the side of caution. Historically, sexuality of minority and voices has been ignored. Now is the time for compensate for injustices and give them an opportunity to voice up. That is why we believe defending the rights of a minority to voice out and vocalize their sexuality is far more important than the small probability and possibility of traumatization and sexual harassment. Moreover, even if radical expressions happens and a lot of people are being offended, that's good. Ignorant and negligent society should wake up, and we have to pay attention to these voices. Like in France, feminism protests against rape culture. A lot of women get naked, and sexual strike in Russia, and that is the only way to galvanize the ignorant society to engage with discourse and their voices. And this is important from feminism perspective as well. Unlike educated women who have a college degree, some women, including uneducated demography without any college degree, for them, their body is the only weapon and asset that they can leverage. It is hard for them to engage with sophisticated elitism discourse in articles, news, or academia. And in Brazil, a lot of women got gathered together to oppose rape culture and so on because they didn't have access to any other resources, networks. They didn't have a capacity to lobby to politicians or donate, money to political parties. They can't do so. The public nudity is the only way for them to vocalize their political grievances so that everyone can listen to that. Yes, some people are shocked. Some people feel offended, but that's a good thing. And it's necessary to galvanize ignorant democratic society to wake up and listen to the voices and engage with the real problems. Second issue, counterfactual. How do people alternatively construct sexual identity otherwise? 3 levels. Number 1, in the opposition paradigm, when there's a strict restriction on sexual expression, people construct sexuality in private sphere, in closed space, and that's dangerous. Let's say the high schoolers or teenagers or young people watch random porn in internet. And a lot of porn companies have incentive to commercialize porn and thereby present distorted sexuality. It is very dangerous that people are exposed to hardcore porn all the time in the private sphere. It's much healthier for people to publicly talk about sexual topics in open sphere and consume countervailing views about sexuality. Secondly, even in the public sphere, under the opposition paradigm, advertisement or majoritarian conversation dictate how people constitute sexuality. Let's say kids and teenagers in Texas or conservative Christian regions, they never have a chance to expose to gay couples holding hands together, and they are taught to be seen if they engage with homosexuality. And this kind of in some countries, like heterosexuality is a predominant narrative, and monopoly of sexual orientation is brutal to these minorities, especially when they are teens and still struggling with their own identity. Number 3, so let's make a comparison. This debate is about trade-off. We understand some people will be shocked and traumatized emotionally and mentally, but we believe that's transitionally aspect of this policy. That's just transitionary and short-term harm. People get soon used to face and confront countervailing views about sexuality. On the other hand, what we would like to defend is minorities or women who have been historically oppressed to voice out their identities and sexual orientation, and protecting these individuals is far more important in a long term in democracy. And we believe especially government has a duty to grant opportunity for these individuals to politically express their sexuality, and rather than trying to be worried about small probability of like shocking or traumatization and sexual harassment. Even if we talk about parents, children, it's much better that children access random porn and distortive types of sexuality and thereby acquire harmful and pernicious body images rather than, but on the other hand, on our side of the house, people are exposed to healthy and transparent political dialogue about diverse and plural sexuality, and that's much healthier for even teenagers and children. And so for all these reasons, as a libertarian approach, we are happy to propose. Thank you.